Good morning. I'm Susan, and yesterday I read a chapter of Number the Stars. This is the second chapter of the book, but before we get started with the story, I have two things to share uh, with kids and with parents. One of them is why we read aloud, and the other one is how could we access a book to go along with what we're doing here. So, wrote this a long time ago as a reading specialist for a newsletter. Did you ever wonder why we bother reading aloud to people who already may be able to read fairly well? Research says it's the single most important factor in reading success. People don't believe it for three reasons. One, it's simple. Two, it's free. And three, we enjoy it. We tend to think something has to be difficult or cost a lot to be worthwhile. Study after study confirms the benefits. Reading aloud to people builds vocabulary and background knowledge and establishes reading-writing connection. It exposes us to a wealth of experiences outside our own and stimulates our imagination, encourages compassion, reshapes negative attitudes into positive ones, and advertises wanting to read more. So a great way to become a better reader is to follow along as someone reads to you or read aloud to someone else. Share the benefits of reading. So that's some important things about reading. And another thing, one of the things that paragraph just said was that one of the things that helps while listening to a reader is to have the book. And that may not be possible, but if it is possible, that is a good thing, because as our eyes read the words when someone else is pronouncing them, we build vocabulary and we actually become better comprehenders and readers because our eyes practice going across the page. So pretty simple strategy, really. If you have a library card, you might be able to get it in an e-print version to read it. I was just looking up on Amazon. It's $5.79. I just Googled it, and Thrift Books had it for $3.99 with 99-cent shipping. Library cards. So if you have a library card, we talked about that. But what if you don't have a library card? I Googled Muskegon Area District Library, which would be the library of my county. And Google said if you look at the menu, and on Muskegon's library's site, there are three little bars at the top right corner. And underneath that menu, there's an I want. And I clicked on it, and one of the choices was get a library card. So even if you don't happen to have one and you're housebound right now, you can get a library card and start being able to access the library, which is pretty cool stuff. So that's the information about reading. And now the most important part, just having fun with the book. Yesterday we talked about Number the Stars being a story of tough times, but with a message of hope. And it is a story of World War II that takes place in Denmark. Chapter 1 introduces you to Anne-Marie, her sister Kirsty, and her best Jewish friend, Ellen Rosen. And they ran into some Nazi soldiers on a street corner. So here we pick up with Kirsty and Anne-Marie, and the title of the chapter, Chapter 2, Who is the Man Who Rides Past? Tell me a story, Anne-Marie, begged Kirsty as she snuggled beside her sister in the big bed they shared. Tell me a fairy tale. Anne-Marie smiled and wrapped her arms around her little sister in the dark. All Danish children grew up familiar with fairy tales. Hans Christian Andersen, the most famous of the tale tellers, had been Danish himself. Do you want the one about the Little Mermaid? That one had always been Anne-Marie's own favorite. But Kirsty said no. Tell me the one that starts with a king and a queen, and they have a beautiful daughter. All right. Once upon a time there was a king, Anne-Marie began. And a queen, Kirsty whispered. Don't forget the queen. And a queen. They lived together in a wonderful palace, and the palace was named Amelienborg. Kirsty asks. Was the palace named Amalienborg? Kirsty asks sleepily. Shh! Don't keep interrupting or I'll never finish the story. No, it wasn't Amalienborg. It was a pretend palace. Anne-Marie talked on, making up a story of a king and a queen and their beautiful daughter, Princess Kirsten. She sprinkled her tale with formal balls, fabulous trimmed gowns, and feast of pink frosted cupcakes, until Kirsty's deep, even breathing told her that her sister was very sound asleep. She stopped, waited for a moment, half expecting Kirsty to murmur, "Then what happened?" But Kirsty was still. Anne-Marie's thoughts turned to the real king, Christian X, and the real palace, Amalienborg, where he lived in the center of Copenhagen. How the people of Denmark love King Christian. He was not like fairy tale kings, who seemed to stand on balconies giving orders to subjects, or who sat on golden thrones demanding to be entertained and looking for suitable husbands for their daughters. King Christian was a real human being, a man with a serious, kind face. She had seen him often when she was younger. Each morning he had come from the palace on his horse, Jubilee, and had ridden alone through the streets of Copenhagen, greeting his people. Sometimes, when Anne-Marie was a little girl, her older sister, Lise, had taken her to stand on the sidewalk so that they could wave to King Christian. Sometimes he had waved back to the two of them and smiled. "Now you are special forever," Lise had told her once, "because you have been greeted by the king." Anne-Marie turned her head on the pillow and stared through the partly opened curtains of the window into the dim September night. Thinking of Lise, her solemn, lovely sister, always made her sad. So she turned her thoughts again to the king, who was still alive, as Lise was not. She remembered a story that Papa had told her shortly after the war began, shortly after Denmark had surrendered and the soldiers had moved in overnight to take their places on the corners. One evening, Papa had told her that earlier he was on an errand near his office, standing on the corner waiting to cross the street when King Christian came by on his morning ride. One of the German soldiers had turned suddenly and asked a question of a teenage boy nearby. "Who is that man who rides past here every morning on his horse?" the German soldier had asked. Papa said he had smiled to himself, amused that the German soldier did not know. He listened while the boy answered. "He is our king," the boy told the soldier. "He is the king of Denmark." "Where is his bodyguard?" the soldier had asked. "And do you know what the boy said?" Papa had asked Anne-Marie. She was sitting on his lap. She was little then, only 7 years old. She shook her head, wanting to hear the answer. The boy looked right at the soldier and he said, "All of Denmark is his bodyguard." Anne-Marie had shivered. It sounded like a very brave answer. "Is it true, Papa?" she'd asked, "what the boy said?" Papa thought a moment. He always considered questions very carefully before he answered them. "Yes," he said at last, "it is true. Any Danish citizen would die for King Christian to protect him." "You too, Papa?" "Yes." "And Mama?" "Mama too." Anne-Marie shivered again. "Then I would too, Papa, if I had to." They sat silently for a moment. From across the room, Mama watched them, Anne-Marie and Papa, and she smiled. Mama had been crocheting that evening 3 years ago, the lacy edging of a pillowcase, part of Lisa's trousseau. Her fingers moved rapidly, turning the thin white thread into intricate narrow border. Lise was a grown-up girl of 18 then, about to be married to Peter Nielsen. When Lise and Peter married, Mama said, Anne-Marie and Kirsty would have a brother for the very first time. Papa, Anne-Marie said finally into the silence, sometimes I wonder why the king wasn't able to protect us. Why didn't he fight the Nazis so that they wouldn't come into Denmark with their guns? Papa sighed. We are such a tiny country, he said, and they are such an enormous enemy. Our king was wise. He knew how few soldiers Denmark had. He knew that many, many Danish people would die if we fought. In Norway they fought, Anne-Marie pointed out. Papa nodded. They fought very fiercely in Norway. They had those huge mountains for the Norwegian soldiers to hide in. Even so, Norway was crushed. In her mind, Anne-Marie pictured Norway as she remembered it from the map at school, up above Denmark. Norway was pink on the school map. She imagined the pink strip of Norway crushed by a fist. Are the German soldiers in Norway now the same as here? Yes, Papa said. In Holland too? In Holland too, Mama added from across the room, and Belgium and France. But not in Sweden, Anne-Marie announced, proud that she knew so much about the world. Sweden was blue on the map, and she had seen Sweden, even though she had never been there. Standing behind Uncle Henrik's house north of Copenhagen, she had looked across the water, the part of the North Sea that was called the Kattegat, to the land on the other side. That is Sweden you are seeing, Uncle Henrik had told her. You are looking across to another country. That's true, Papa had said. Sweden is still free. And now, 3 years later, it was still true, but much else had changed. King Christian was getting old, and he had been badly injured last year in a fall from his horse, faithful old Jubilee, who had carried him around Copenhagen so many mornings. For days they thought he would die, and all of Denmark had mourned. But he hadn't. King Christian was still alive. It was Lise who was not. It was her tall, beautiful sister who had died in an accident 2 weeks before her wedding. In the blue carved trunk in the corner of the bedroom, Anne-Marie could see its shape even in the dark, were folded Lisa's pillowcases with their crocheted edges. Her wedding dress with its hand-embroidered neckline, unworn, and the yellow dress that she had worn and danced in with its full skirt flying at the party celebrating her engagement to Peter. Mama and Papa never spoke of Lise. They never opened the trunk. But Anne-Marie did from time to time when she was alone in the apartment. Alone, she touched Lisa's things gently, remembering her soft, quiet sister who had looked forward so to marriage and children of her own. Red-headed Peter, her sister's fiancé, had not married anyone in the years since Lisa's death. He had changed a great deal. Once he had been like a fun-loving older brother to Anne-Marie and Kirsty, teasing and tickling, always a source of foolishness and pranks. Now he still stopped by the apartment often, and his greetings to the girls were warm and smiling. But he was usually in a hurry, talking quickly to Mama and Papa about things Anne-Marie didn't understand. He no longer sang the nonsense songs that he had once made Anne-Marie and Kirsty shriek with laughter. And he never lingered any more. Papa had changed too. He seemed much older and very tired, defeated. The whole world had changed. Only the fairy tales remained the same. And they lived happily ever after, Marie recited, whispering into the dark, completing the tale for her sister who slept beside her, one thumb in her mouth. So the end of chapter 2. I wonder if stories help us during difficult times in our lives. Do we need stories? Thoughts?